I think it's pretty heroic to sort of go and do that at the same event as a man who, when he actually played a key part in the toppling of Boris Johnson, wasn't even big enough to go and tell him to his face. I remember being in number 10, watching the ticker tape go across the TV news saying that the Chancellor of the Exchequer had resigned. He hadn't directly told the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, that face-to-face. Another person had resigned that day, Sajid Javid. He went to see him in his room. So I think you've just got to bear that in mind and think, there we are.
Marks out of 10 for that speech?
Well, it was a great piece of oratory, wasn't it? And some very serious points there. You just played one about the Ukraine, and what he does is mix the sort of, the fun with the serious stuff.
So is that a 9 or a 10?
Well,
can't dodge the first question.
It was more lively, wasn't it, than anything we've had over the last few weeks. And it was a reminder in that sense of what has been missing from this campaign, and a reminder of what has been missing from British politics. And unfortunately, it's a painful, late in the day reminder, a little bit like an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend who went off and married somebody else flirting with you. It's just a reminder of what you haven't got rather than something that makes you feel good about yourself.
Well, I have to say, Guto, it's also a reminder for a lot of our listeners of all the stuff that Boris Johnson did that led to him having to leave Downing Street. Let me just read you one. Phil in Cambridge, the return of Johnson has just sealed it for Labour. The Tories are so tin-eared, they have no idea what a liability that man is after his dreadful period of incompetent law-breaking rule. So it reminds people of two different things, and it's possible that both can be true at the same time.
Of course, but I think we can safely say that those people who loathe him have not been hovering over how to sort of cast their vote for a long, long time. And it's also for perspective. I worked for him back in 2008, 2012. People have told me for 15 odd years that he's not a serious politician, that he can't do detail, that he's unelectable. And since then, he won in London twice. He delivered the Brexit victory, though it wasn't something I particularly wanted. And he won a record election back in 2019 against a whole load of warnings like the one you give now. Now, obviously, getting one fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police for an event at 2:00 in the afternoon in the cabinet room obviously transforms everything and makes him the most odious person on the global stage for some people, ridiculously. But I don't think there was a lot of votes to be lost last night. There were perhaps some votes to be gained, to be dragged back into the Tory fold, and people put off voting for reform in particular.
So on reform, he talked about the Kremlin crawler. How effective do you think Boris Johnson's 3 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever it was, is going to be in terms of people who are thinking of voting reform coming back to the Conservatives?
As always, Boris has this knack of being able to say in a very amusing way something that's deeply profound. And a lot of people have fallen for Nigel Farage, thinking he's just a great bloke, that's a bit of a laugh, to have a pint with in the pub, which he is. But reform are a serious threat to, a whole load of things that most of us hold dear in this country. And a number of people who've been candidates for them have said things that are deeply offensive and hold views that most of us would disagree with. And sometimes that needs to be called out. And Boris can call it out more effectively, clearly, than anybody else has done in the last 5 or 6 weeks.
Do you think it was a bit weird last night that Boris Johnson didn't share a stage with Rishi Sunak? He didn't shake his hand. He didn't refer to him by name, I don't think, even though apparently it was Rishi Sunak who texted Boris Johnson and said, I wonder if there's any way that you could help. That's weird. We know that there's not much love lost between them, but that's weird, isn't it?
You not only want your pound of flesh, but you need pints and pints of blood, don't you? It's never enough. There's never an apology. There's never a contribution. There's enough. I think it's pretty heroic to sort of go and do that at the same event as a man who, when he actually played a key part in the toppling of Boris Johnson, wasn't even big enough to go and tell him to his face. I remember being in number 10, watching the ticker tape go across the TV news saying that the Chancellor of the Exchequer had resigned. He hadn't directly told the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, that face-to-face. Another person had resigned that day, Sajid Javid. He went to see him in his room. So I think you've just got to bear that in mind and think, there we are.
But he still did it. He still answered
the
call.
Did it because I think lots of other people have been begging him to sort of get involved. I know newspaper editors have been leaning on him, saying that they just can't get, anyone at the heart of this administration who can articulate as well as Boris Johnson can, the dangers of reform, the perils of a Labour government that is unchecked, the case for the Conservative Party, and some formidable achievements over the last few years and indeed the last decade. And so I think all those people have lent on him and he thought, he should come on. But I know also that he's felt that you can't just run on the field as a cheerleader at the end when somebody else has picked the team and somebody else has chosen the game plan and you're not going to change very much. He's very, very realistic about that.
After the election, what do you think Boris Johnson's going to do in terms of the Conservative Party? Is he going to be a player?
I don't think so. No, he's not in Parliament, and he's out of that fray. He's got his book that will be out before too long. 2 books. One that Stig will be very interested in on Shakespeare, and the other one his memoirs. And he's got 3 young children to look after as well.
That's a lot of numbers. Thank you very much for that, Guto. That is Guto Harri. He is Boris Johnson's former Downing Street Director of Communications. We're also going to have a quick word with Ben Page, Global Chief Executive of the polling giant Ipsos. Good morning, Ben. Ben, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay.
No.
Now, yes, I can hear you now. Now, we had a new MRP poll yesterday evening. Do you think, well, first of all, tell us what that suggests.
That just suggests an absolutely crushing Labour majority. I think I would probably wait for the final polls, and it's not long to go now. You've also got the exit poll that we do that's out at 10 o'clock tomorrow night, which has got a very good track record. The MRP models obviously rely on guessing effectively, but using advanced statistical techniques, what will happen in individual constituencies, some of which you may not have even done any more than a handful of interviews. So you've got a largish sample, but then you're using that to effectively do what's called impute an answer for every single constituency. They all show a large Labour majority. The question from it all is just how large, and that will be answered very simply tomorrow. To me now, the really interesting question is actually how many people bother voting? And that is where we can see, for example, only 37% of the under 24s are currently telling us they're 10 out of 10 certain to vote tomorrow. And I don't think it will be as low as 2001, where there was a large Labour majority, but actually only less than 6 out of 10 registered voters voted. But I do suspect that up to 30% of registered voters tomorrow will actually end up staying at home.
Right. And what can you just clarify what the latest polls are suggesting in terms of Conservative MPs?
So, I mean, anything from sort of 60 to, 120, 130. There's a range because, these polls aren't really able to tell you with perfect accuracy. That's what the exit poll is trying to do, which works in a very, very different way. But yes, basically a majority for Labour that is unprecedented. Remember, back in 1997, the Labour landslide was a majority of 197. Our MRP model, which is sort of in the middle, has a majority of 256. So this is we are in uncharted territory here.
And finally, I'm sure the answer to this will be no, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The polls have very much been the story of this campaign more than anything else. It feels that in terms of policy, it's been polls, not policy. Are there any nerves in the polling industry about whether these are all going to be right?
There's always nerves. Remember back in 2019, the polls in the Corbyn versus Boris Johnson election were accurate to an average of 0.6% for each party's share of the vote. So And actually, my French colleagues last weekend also achieved something very, very similar. So we think we've learned from all of our near misses. And remember that if you look at all polls since 1942 in all general elections, all over the world, the average error of opinion polls is plus or minus 2% for each political party. So just to digest that, if you say that the Conservatives in our last poll were on 19%, it could be as high as 21, it could be as low as 17, but it doesn't change the overall issue, which is that because Labour is so far ahead on 41 to 40, between 39 and 43% of the vote.
Yeah.
So it will be, I will come on here and eat not just one hat, but 5 hats. If something really dramatic happens. But the size of the majority is still in question.
Okay. Well, you can eat a Times Radio election hat if you have to, Ben, but hopefully you won't have to. No one wants to see that. That's Ben Page, Global Chief Executive of the polling giant Ipsos.